okay, it's not so much about what you should or shouldn't do, right? So this is why self-inquiry is powerful, okay? And can have its utility, because when you are essentially questioning or investigating the what even seems normal and what seems like it's always been okay to you. So for an example, when that very thought comes along, even let's say you try to exert effort into meditating, when that thought comes along that tries to distract you away from even the meditation, the self-inquiry in this case would be to question, who is it that is trying to distract me? What is the nature of that which is trying to distract me? What is the thought? What is the motivation behind the thought? You're essentially observing the thought, okay? And then you ask these questions, you're investigating to essentially just see what the thought is, to see it for what it is. And the moment it's seen that this thought is no different to any other object within reality, whether it's an object
Yeah.
like this pen that you hold, so that you don't really care much about, or whether it's like the thought itself, which you are identifying with, which for all these years you recognize as you. If you realize that actually it does, whatever you're identified with or not, it's all just objects, right?
Yeah.
When that thought comes along now, it doesn't have the same pull effect. It doesn't have the same magnitude of 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 distraction to it.
Yeah, yeah. But how do you see that that thought is just a thought and not something that is you?
Well, you when you investigate or when you do self-inquiry.
So, what was the self inquiry you mentioned that might be helpful in this case? Did you?
So questioning the thought, like, what is this thought? Who is it? Where does it come from? Questioning these things. Now, most of these questions, they don't actually have an answer.
Right.
But what it does is it it's it's allowing you to recognize that deep down you don't know. Because the assumption is that okay, this is a thought. You may immediately say that's me, right? Because of the years of conditioning. And so when you question it, when you're doing the self-inquiry, I'd say the underlying effect that brings about, let's say, results, or is effective, is the admittance that you don't know. And that naturally relaxes you and opens you up. Because when you don't know something, you allow that thing to just be so that you can know it. Okay? If you don't know what will happen in a particular movie, you're allowing the movie to play so you recognize what takes place in the movie. Now, and this is extremely difficult because the thoughts, there can be the notion that there can be an identification with these thoughts. Like, it's me, obviously it's me. And so sometimes having this conversation can be useful because it shows you a different perspective, a different angle to look at it, where it's like, maybe it's not me. Like, for an example, if you are your thoughts, then who is the one listening, right? And that's something that can eventually be recognized and seen. I sometimes use the grass blade analogy, right? So let's just say, for instance, there's a big field of grass, right? And there's millions of blades of grass. And so if you just look at one blade of grass and you just focus on that one, all the other blades of grass are blurred out. Okay? But if you observe this blade of grass long enough and you just allow it to be, in the background of that blade of grass, another blade of grass might appear more clearer. Okay, there's more focus, and you can see two blades of grass now. And you recognize that they're both perhaps different shapes, different lengths, different colors and sizes. But as you continue, you might see three blades of grass, and then you see four blades of grass, right? And eventually you're just observing, and at some point you realize there's a whole field of grass, right? And so that is what introspection or self-inquiry or observation, that's the underlying tone or direction of where it naturally sort of takes you. That is the direction of that very allowance that I'm talking about. If you just allow things to be, right, and naturally, it starts to rise up. All the ripples on the surface of the water, if you just allow the surface to just settle, then eventually you see into the depths of the water, right? In the same way, if you're allowing the thought to arise and go, you're allowing it to just be observed. By default, it's observed. And so you're allowing the recognition to see what that thought really is. And then perhaps there's the recognition, because what I was doing earlier is I'm giving you the answer, so to speak. I'm telling you that there's no difference between the pen and the thought, but ideally you recognize that, you see that for yourself. And so once that is recognized, then the hold or the influence or the magnitude of how thoughts have an impact or can steer your perspective decreases dramatically. It's seen for what it is now.
Yeah.
Right. And so it doesn't have the same pull effect. It doesn't have the same it doesn't have an influence on the narrative as much anymore.